My brother broke my nose and my mom laughed it off. The school counselor's mandatory report changed everything. My brother Danny is autistic and 3 years younger than me. Growing up, my mother used his diagnosis to excuse everything he did wrong, not to get him help or teach him boundaries, but to avoid parenting altogether. When he threw my homework in the fireplace, she said he didn't understand. When he smashed my laptop during a meltdown, she said I shouldn't have left it where he could see it. When he hit me, which happened weekly, she'd say he was just expressing himself, and I needed to be more understanding. She never got him proper therapy, never worked on coping strategies, never taught him that hurting people was wrong. She just laughed and said boys will be boys, special boys especially. The worst part was Danny was actually very capable of learning. His special education teacher told my mom repeatedly that he responded well to structure and clear boundaries at school. He never hit anyone there because there were consequences. But my mother said school didn't understand how hard things were for Danny at home and refused to implement any of their suggestions. She preferred having a violent son she could make excuses for over actually helping him develop. I was 15 and Danny was 12 when it happened. I was doing homework at the kitchen table and Danny wanted my calculator. I told him I was using it, but he could have it in 20 minutes. He asked my mom and she said, just give it to him. He needs it more. I said I was literally using it for a test review. Danny grabbed for it and I held it away. My mother was standing right there when Danny punched me full force in the face. I heard the crack before I felt the pain. Blood poured everywhere. My nose was clearly broken, shifted to the side of my face. My mother laughed. She actually laughed and said I should have just given him the calculator. She told me to put ice on it and stop being dramatic while Danny sat at the table using my calculator to type random numbers. I walked myself to the emergency room because my mother said she couldn't leave Danny when he was upset, even though he was perfectly calm playing with the calculator. The nurse asked how I broke my nose and I told the truth. She asked where my parents were and I said my mom was home with my brother. The nurse's face changed and she called in a social worker. The social worker asked more questions and then said she had to make a report. The next day, Child Protective Services showed up at our house. My mother was furious, saying I'd betrayed the family by telling outsiders our business. She kept insisting it was just sibling stuff, boys being boys. The CPS worker asked why a 12-year-old breaking a 15-year-old's nose was funny to her. My mother said the worker didn't understand autism. The worker said she actually specialized in cases with developmental disabilities, and what she understood was that my mother was failing both her children. The investigation revealed that Danny hadn't been to his behavioral therapy in 2 years because my mother said it was too much hassle. He hadn't seen his developmental pediatrician in 18 months. The school had sent dozens of messages about resources and support that my mother ignored. She'd been collecting disability payments for Danny, but not using them for his care. Instead, she'd been spending them on herself, while telling everyone how hard it was to have a special needs child. CPS mandated that Danny return to therapy immediately and that my mother attend parenting classes for special needs families. They also required family therapy, where I finally got to say how terrified I was in my own home. The therapist asked my mother why she thought violence was acceptable. My mother said it wasn't violence, it was just Danny being Danny. The therapist said that was exactly the problem. Danny actually thrived once he got back into proper therapy. Within 6 months, he hadn't hit anyone once. He learned coping strategies, communication tools, and most importantly, that hurting others had consequences. The therapist said his previous violence was largely because he'd learned from my mother that it got him what he wanted. My mother had to complete a year of parenting classes where other parents called her out constantly. One father, whose son was also autistic, said she was using the diagnosis as an excuse for lazy parenting and making life harder for everyone with autism by perpetuating stereotypes. My mother tried to argue, but the instructor sided with the other parents. She failed the class twice because she kept insisting she'd done nothing wrong. The third time, she finally passed by just repeating what they wanted to hear, but she told me she still thought everyone was overreacting. The third time my mom tried the parenting class, she sat in the back row with her arms crossed tight against her chest. I stood in the hallway during family observation week, watching through the small window in the door as other parents shared stories about their kids. A mom with short brown hair talked about teaching her son to ask for breaks when he felt overwhelmed. A dad in a blue shirt described using visual schedules to help his daughter manage transitions. My mom stayed quiet in her chair, only speaking when the instructor called on her directly. Hudson Meyer sat 3 seats away from my mom. His son was in Danny's grade at the school, also autistic, and I'd seen them at the therapy center a few times. Hudson had been participating all session, asking questions and taking notes. During the group discussion about accountability, he turned in his chair to face my mom directly. He said she was making life harder for every autistic kid by using the diagnosis as an excuse for lazy parenting. The room went completely silent. Even the instructor stopped writing on the whiteboard. My mom's face turned red and she opened her mouth to argue, but Hudson kept talking. He said parents like her were why people thought autistic kids couldn't learn or follow rules, when really they just needed proper support and consistent boundaries. My mom tried to defend herself, saying nobody understood how difficult things were with Danny, but Iris Doherty cut her off. The instructor walked to the front of the room and said the whole class had noticed my mom's resistance to the material. She said my mom's body language and minimal participation showed she wasn't genuinely engaging with what they were teaching. Iris told her that unless she demonstrated real effort and understanding, she'd fail for a third time and face additional court consequences. My mom's jaw got tight, and she stared at her lap for the rest of the session. That night, my mom came home and slammed the front door so hard the picture frames on the wall shook. She threw her purse on the couch and started ranting about how everyone ganged up on her. She said nobody understood how hard her life was, raising 2 boys alone, dealing with Danny's needs. She said Hudson had no right to judge her parenting when he didn't know what she'd been through. I stayed in my room with the door closed and texted Graciela, Danny's therapist, to let her know our mom was having a bad night. Graciela texted back asking if we were safe, and I said yes. She was just angry and loud. The next parenting class session, my mom's whole attitude changed. She sat in the middle of the room instead of the back. She raised her hand to answer questions. She nodded along when other parents shared their experiences. She even volunteered a story about implementing one of Danny's therapy strategies at home. But on the drive home, she told me she was just telling them what they wanted to hear so she could pass and get everyone off her back. She said she still thought the whole thing was ridiculous, and people were making way too big a deal out of normal sibling stuff. Danny had been violence-free for 4 months now. His progress reports from the school showed he was participating more in class discussions and had made 2 friends in his grade. His teacher wrote that he was helping other students with their math work and volunteering to clean up supplies after activities. Graciela told us in our last check-in that Danny was responding beautifully to having clear expectations and consistent consequences. She said he thrived when he knew exactly what the rules were and what would happen if he broke them. In our family therapy session that week, Atticus Petrov asked Danny how he felt about his behavior changes. Danny sat forward on the couch and said he liked knowing what the rules were. He said it was easier when things made sense and he didn't have to guess what was okay and what wasn't. He said at the school, everyone knew hitting meant time out and losing recess, so he just didn't hit anyone. Listening to him explain it so simply made me realize how much our mom's chaos had hurt him too. She'd never given him any structure or consequences, so he had no way to learn what was acceptable. Atticus turned to my mom and asked what she'd learned from Danny's progress about the importance of structure and boundaries. My mom gave a perfect textbook answer about consistency and clear expectations being essential for children with autism. She used all the right words from the parenting class materials. But I watched her eyes while she talked and I could see she didn't really believe any of it. She was just repeating what they wanted to hear, the same way she'd admitted in the car. Michelle Bradshaw came to our house the following week for her regular check-in. She interviewed each of us separately in different rooms. When it was my turn, she asked if I felt safe at home now. I told her honestly that I did because Danny had changed so much. I said I wasn't scared of getting hit anymore, and Danny was actually fun to hang out with now that he had better ways to handle frustration. Michelle wrote notes on her clipboard and asked about my mom's attitude toward all the therapy and classes. I hesitated, not wanting to get my mom in more trouble, but Michelle reminded me that honesty was important for keeping our family on track. When Michelle interviewed my mom in the living room, I stayed in my bedroom but could hear my mom's voice through the door. She was complaining about how intrusive all this monitoring was and how she was treated like a criminal for one little incident. Michelle's response came through calm but firm. She reminded my mom this wasn't one incident, but years of documented neglect. She listed off the missed therapy appointments, the ignored school communications, the disability money spent on things other than Danny's care. My mom's voice got quieter after that, and I couldn't make out the rest of the conversation. Michelle's report went into the file, and CPS scheduled another visit for the following month. Danny started his social skills group on a Tuesday afternoon at the therapy center. I picked him up from the school and drove him there myself, because my mom said she had a headache and couldn't deal with the traffic. The waiting room had other parents sitting with coffee and magazines while their kids were in session. I sat near the window and watched cars pull in and out of the parking lot. After an hour, Danny came out smiling bigger than I'd seen in months. He talked the entire drive home about a kid named Aries who also liked building things with Legos. Danny said Aries showed him pictures on his phone of a huge Star Wars set he was working on at home. They'd exchanged ideas about building techniques, and Aries invited Danny to bring some of his creations next week to show the group. My brother talked so fast his words ran together, and he kept bouncing in his seat. When we got home, he ran straight to his room to find specific Lego sets he wanted to bring next time. My mom was lying on the couch watching TV and barely looked up when Danny tried to tell her about Aries. She just said, "That's nice, honey," and turned the volume up. I made dinner while Danny sorted through his LEGO collection in his room, calling out to me every few minutes about which sets were the coolest. The next week, Graciela called and asked if I wanted to sit in on one of Danny's therapy sessions. She said it would help me understand his coping strategies better, so I could support him at home. My mom said she couldn't go because she had errands to run, so I drove Danny to his Thursday appointment. Graciela met us in the lobby and walked us back to her office. The room had soft blue walls and shelves full of fidget toys and games. Danny sat in a beanbag chair while I took the regular chair near the door. Graciela worked with Danny on recognizing his body's warning signs when he started getting upset. She had him practice deep breathing and showed him how to use a stress ball when his hands wanted to hit something. Danny demonstrated the techniques he'd learned, and Graciela praised him for how well he was doing. She asked him questions about situations at home and school, and Danny answered honestly about times he felt frustrated, but used his strategies instead of hitting. I watched my brother talk about his feelings in ways I'd never heard before. After the session ended, Graciela asked Danny to wait in the lobby while she talked to me privately. She closed the door and sat in the chair Danny had used. She told me Danny talks about me in his therapy sessions a lot. He feels really bad about all the times he hurt me over the years. Graciela said he's working through complicated feelings about how our mother never taught him better ways to handle his emotions. She said Danny's starting to understand that hitting people wasn't okay, even though Mom always laughed it off and made it seem normal. He's processing a lot of guilt now that he knows how much he hurt me. Graciela asked how I was doing with everything, and I admitted it was weird seeing Danny change so much. Part of me was happy he was doing better, but another part was angry it took me getting seriously hurt for anyone to help him. She nodded and said those feelings made complete sense. She reminded me that Danny was also a victim of our mother's neglect, just in a different way. Our family therapy session that week started like usual with Atticus asking how everyone's week went. Danny sat forward on the couch and said he wanted to say something to me. My mom looked nervous and shifted in her seat. Atticus encouraged Danny to continue. Danny turned to face me directly and said he was sorry for hitting me all those times. He said he didn't understand that it was really wrong because Mom always laughed about it and told him it was okay. But now he knows it was bad and he hurt me and he's really sorry. His voice cracked a little at the end. I felt my throat get tight and had to swallow hard before I could answer. I told Danny I forgave him and that I was proud of how hard he was working to learn new skills. I said I could see how much he'd changed, and I was glad we could actually be brothers now, instead of me always being scared of him. Danny's eyes got watery and he nodded. My mom made a sound in her throat and muttered something about everyone acting like she's the villain when she was just doing her best. Atticus stopped writing notes and looked directly at my mother. He said intent doesn't erase impact. He said her best involved ignoring professional advice for years, skipping Danny's medical appointments and collecting disability money she didn't use for his care. He listed specific examples from the CPS report while my mother's face turned red. She opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. She just sat there staring at her hands while Atticus continued. He said Danny's remarkable progress proved he was always capable of learning and controlling his behavior when given proper support. The only thing that changed was that Laura finally had to provide that support under court order. My mother didn't say anything else for the rest of the session. 2 weeks later, my mom came home from her parenting class actually smiling. She announced she'd passed on her 3rd try. She'd participated in every discussion, completed all the assignments, and Iris said she demonstrated good understanding of the material. My mom seemed proud of herself for getting through it. The court got Iris's official report a few days later. Michelle showed it to us during her next home visit. The report said Laura completed all requirements and showed sufficient understanding of the course content. But Iris also wrote that she had some concerns about whether Laura truly believed the material or was just repeating what she needed to pass. Michelle said the court would take that into consideration at our 6-month hearing. The hearing happened on a cold morning in November. We all sat in the courtroom while the judge read through progress reports from Graciela, Atticus, the school, and Michelle. The judge said she was really impressed with Danny's improvement. She said the reports showed he hadn't had any violent incidents in months and was doing well in the school and therapy. She looked at me and said Michelle's reports indicated I felt safe at home now, which was the most important thing. But then the judge's expression got more serious. She said she was concerned about Laura's continued resistance in therapy sessions. She referenced specific examples from Atticus's reports where my mother minimized her role in the family's problems or framed herself as a victim. The judge said while Laura completed the parenting class, the instructor's concerns about genuine understanding were noted. She announced she was extending the family therapy requirement for another 6 months, and CPS monitoring would continue. My mother's face went completely white and then red. She stood up and said she'd done everything they asked. She said it wasn't fair to keep punishing her when she completed all the requirements. The judge told her to sit down and said this wasn't punishment. Michelle stood up and explained to the judge that the extension was necessary, given Laura's documented pattern of stopping Danny's treatment whenever oversight decreased. She said the previous 2 years without therapy happened because there was no monitoring to ensure Laura followed through. Michelle said sustained progress needed to be verified before supervision could end. Laura started to argue that this situation was different, but Michelle cut her off. She said the extension wasn't up for debate and Laura needed to accept it. The judge agreed and signed the order right there. My mother didn't speak to anyone on the drive home. Danny's special education teacher sent home a note about 3 weeks after the court hearing. I opened it at the kitchen table while my mother was in the other room watching TV. The teacher wrote that Danny had become one of the most cooperative students in her class, and she was amazed by how much he'd changed in 5 months. She said he was helping other students now and following directions the first time without any problems. I showed the note to Danny, and he smiled really big. He said his therapist Graciela taught him ways to stay calm when things got hard, and it was working really well. I felt proud of him, but also sad thinking about all the years this could have happened if my mother had just done what she was supposed to do. Danny asked if we could play video games together, and I realized I hadn't spent time alone with him in years because I was always scared he'd hit me. I said yes, and we went to my room to set up the console. We played for almost 2 hours, and Danny actually followed all the house rules about taking turns and not getting mad when he lost. When he started feeling frustrated during a hard level, he used one of his breathing techniques and calmed himself down without throwing anything or yelling. It felt weird to just hang out with my brother like a normal person, instead of being constantly ready to protect myself. My mother walked past my room and stopped in the doorway watching us play. She made a comment about how nice it was that everyone was so happy now that she'd been forced to jump through all these hoops. Her voice had this bitter edge to it, like she was the victim in all this. I kept my eyes on the screen and didn't respond, because I wasn't going to let her ruin Danny's progress with her attitude. Danny didn't seem to notice and just kept playing, completely focused on the game. After she walked away, I felt angry that she still couldn't see how much better things were now that Danny had real help. Our next therapy session with Atticus happened on a Thursday afternoon. We all sat in our usual spots in his office with the gray couch and the bookshelf full of psychology books. Atticus looked at me and asked how I was processing everything that had happened over the past 6 months. I told him the truth. I said I was grateful for the intervention and happy that Danny was doing so much better, but I was also really angry that it took me getting seriously hurt for anyone to help us. I said I'd been telling teachers and counselors for years that I was scared at home, and nobody did anything until my nose got broken. Atticus nodded and said my anger was completely reasonable, and I had every right to feel that way. He said it was normal to feel resentful that I had to suffer for so long before the system finally stepped in to protect me. He told me that many kids in my situation carry complicated feelings about both the abuse they went through and the fact that help came so late. He said those feelings were valid, and I shouldn't feel guilty about being angry, even though things were better now. My mother shifted in her seat and opened her mouth to say something. Atticus held up his hand and stopped her before she could start talking. He said this session was about my feelings, and she needed to listen without making it about her own hurt feelings or defending herself. Laura sat back with her arms crossed, and I could see the anger radiating off her. Her jaw was tight, and she stared at the wall instead of looking at either of us. The rest of the session she barely spoke, and when Atticus asked her direct questions, she gave short answers that made it clear she was mad at both of us. The following week, Danny had an appointment with his developmental pediatrician that he hadn't seen in 18 months. My mother had to take time off work to drive him there, and she complained the whole morning about how much time all these appointments took. The doctor spent over an hour with Danny doing assessments and reviewing his progress reports from Graciela. When they came out to the waiting room, the doctor asked to speak with my mother privately. I sat there reading a magazine while they talked in the exam room. When they finally came out, my mother's face was red, and she walked straight to the car without saying anything. Danny told me later that the doctor said she was really impressed with his progress and adjusted his treatment plan to match his new skill level. He said the doctor told our mother this was what proper intervention looked like, and she wished it hadn't taken a CPS case to make it happen. My mother didn't talk to either of us on the drive home and went straight to her room when we got back to the house. A few days later, an official letter came from the school district. My mother opened it at the kitchen counter, and I watched her face change as she read it. The letter said the school district was acknowledging their repeated attempts over the past 2 years to communicate with her about resources and support for Danny that she had ignored. It listed specific dates and types of communication, including emails, phone calls, and letters sent home. The letter said they were now working directly with Graciela to make sure Danny's IEP properly reflected his current needs and abilities. My mother threw the letter on the counter and said the school was just covering themselves legally. She said they were making her look like a bad parent when really they just wanted to blame someone for not helping Danny sooner. I picked up the letter after she left the room and read through all the dates. There were dozens of attempts to reach her going back almost 3 years. Every single one of them was ignored or dismissed. Michelle came for her monthly home visit on a Tuesday morning. She spent time with each of us separately like she always did. When she talked to me, I told her things were going well, and I felt safe at home now. She asked about Danny's progress, and I showed her the note from his teacher. Michelle smiled and said she was glad to hear he was doing so well. Then she went to talk to my mother in the living room, while Danny and I stayed in the kitchen. I couldn't hear everything they said, but I heard Michelle's voice stay calm and professional the whole time. After Michelle left, I found the report she'd written sitting on the printer where my mother had left it. The report said Laura had been consistently taking Danny to therapy and using the behavioral strategies at home. But Michelle also wrote that Laura still talked about everything like she was forced to comply instead of helping her son. She noted that my mother described the court requirements as punishment rather than necessary intervention. That weekend, I was in my room doing homework when I heard my mother on the phone in the hallway. She was talking to a friend, and her voice carried through my closed door. She said everyone was treating her like an abusive parent when all she did was struggle with a difficult child. She said people acted like she deliberately hurt her kids when she was just overwhelmed and doing her best with a special needs son. She talked about how unfair the whole system was and how nobody understood what it was like to be in her position. I sat there listening and felt my stomach turn. After everything that happened, all the therapy and classes and court hearings, she still saw herself as the victim. She still didn't get that she chose not to help Danny for years, even when help was available, and people were begging her to use it. I put my headphones on and turned my music up loud so I wouldn't have to hear any more of her conversation. Our next family session happened on a Thursday afternoon. Atticus sat across from my mother with a folder in his lap and told her he wanted to talk about something specific. He said he'd been hearing her describe herself as a victim of an unfair system, and he thought it was time to address that directly. My mother shifted in her seat and crossed her arms. Atticus opened the folder and pulled out papers. He walked through examples one by one. The behavioral therapy clinic that was 15 minutes from our house and fully covered by Danny's insurance. The developmental pediatrician appointment she canceled repeatedly. The school emails offering free resources and support groups. The disability payments she received every month that were meant for Danny's care. He laid each piece of paper on the coffee table between them. My mother's face got red, but she stayed quiet. Atticus asked her to explain how these were examples of the system failing her rather than her failing to use available help. She didn't answer right away. My mother finally said the therapy place was too far and too expensive. Atticus picked up one of the papers and showed it to her. He said the clinic was 14.6 miles from our house according to the address on file. He showed her another paper with insurance records proving every session would have cost her $0 out of pocket. He asked her directly what her explanation was now. My mother stared at the papers on the table. She opened her mouth like she was going to say something, but nothing came out. She just sat there looking at the floor while Atticus waited. The silence stretched out for what felt like forever. Danny fidgeted next to me on the couch. I could hear the clock on the wall ticking. My mother never answered the question. A few days later, my mother got a phone call from Hudson Meyer. I was in the kitchen when she answered, and I heard her side of the conversation. She was polite and said yes a lot and told him that was very kind of him. When she hung up, she seemed annoyed. I asked who it was, and she said it was that father from her parenting class. Hudson had called to check on how our family was doing. He told my mother his son was doing really well with proper therapy and support. He offered to connect her with other parents of autistic kids who could help her actually understand what Danny needed, instead of just going through the motions to satisfy the court. He said he knew some really good people who'd been through similar situations and come out the other side as better parents. My mother told me later that afternoon she wasn't interested in Hudson's offer. She said she didn't need other parents judging her choices and telling her what to do. She said everyone acted like they knew better than her about her own son. I sat there listening to her, and something clicked in my head. She still saw herself as the victim. She still thought she was persecuted by people who didn't understand. She didn't see herself as someone who failed her kids for years and got caught. She saw herself as someone being unfairly criticized and forced to comply with unreasonable demands. Nothing had actually changed in how she viewed the situation. She was just doing what she had to do to get people off her back. Danny's 13th birthday came in early October. For the first time ever, we planned a real party with friends coming over. My mother bought decorations and a cake. Danny invited 3 kids from the school, including Aries from his social skills group. I helped set up the living room with streamers and balloons. The whole time I kept waiting for something to go wrong. I kept expecting Danny to get overwhelmed or upset, but he didn't. When his friends arrived, he greeted them at the door and showed them his room. They played video games and looked at his LEGO sets. Danny used the strategies Graciela taught him for managing excitement. When he started feeling too stimulated, he excused himself and went to his room for 5 minutes to calm down. Then he came back and rejoined the group. Nobody even noticed. It was just a normal birthday party with normal kid stuff happening. I stood in the doorway watching Danny blow out the candles on his cake. His friends sang happy birthday, and Danny laughed when Aries made a joke about making a wish for 1,000,000 LEGOS. I felt happy seeing him like this, but I also felt this heavy sadness sitting in my chest. I kept thinking about all the years he could have been like this, all the birthdays we didn't have parties because my mother said Danny couldn't handle it, all the times he hit me or broke things because nobody taught him better ways to handle his feelings. He was capable of this the whole time. He just needed someone to actually help him instead of making excuses. My mother had stolen years from both of us by refusing to do what she was supposed to do. The next day, my mother posted pictures from Danny's party on Facebook. I saw them when I was scrolling on my phone. She'd written a long caption about how proud she was of her special boy. She talked about how hard she worked to support him and help him thrive. She used phrases like devoted mother and tireless advocate. She made it sound like she was the reason Danny was doing well. She made it sound like she'd been fighting for him all along. I felt sick reading it. She was performing for sympathy and praise from people who didn't know the truth. She was taking credit for the progress that only happened because the court forced her to actually parent. I closed the app and put my phone down. 8 months after the CPS investigation started, we had another court review. The judge sat behind her desk looking through reports from Michelle and Atticus and Graciela. She said the outcomes for both Danny and me were clearly positive. Danny hadn't had any violent incidents in 8 months. He was doing well in the school and participating in therapy. I was doing better too, according to what I'd told my therapist. The judge looked at my mother and asked her a direct question. She asked if my mother understood why the interventions were necessary. My mother gave an answer that sounded like she'd practiced it. She said she recognized the need for professional support and understood that structure and consistency were important for Danny's development. She said she was grateful for the resources that had been provided. It sounded right, but it didn't sound real. The judge didn't look convinced by my mother's answer. She said the words were good, but she had concerns about genuine understanding versus compliance. But she also acknowledged that my mother had followed every court order consistently for 8 months. She said the outcomes for the children were what mattered most, and those outcomes were positive. She reduced the monitoring to quarterly check-ins instead of monthly, but she kept the therapy requirement in place indefinitely. She said Danny would continue seeing Graciela, and our family would continue seeing Atticus every other week. My mother nodded and said she understood. The judge dismissed us and we left the courthouse. In the parking lot, my mother was in a surprisingly good mood. She smiled and said she was glad that was over. She said the judge obviously recognized she was doing her best all along. She said the reduced monitoring proved she wasn't as bad as everyone had been saying. I unlocked the car and got in without responding. My mother kept talking as we drove home. She said it was nice to finally be vindicated after all these months of being treated like a criminal. She said she knew all along that if she just did what they asked, they'd eventually see she was a good mother. I turned up the radio and stared out the window. She still didn't get it. She probably never would. I don't argue with my mother because I've learned in therapy that she will never fully accept what she did wrong. Atticus told me some people can't handle being wrong about big things. They have to rewrite history so they can live with themselves. My mother is one of those people. She'll always believe she was doing her best and everyone else was too harsh. I used to try to make her understand. I used to think if I just explained it the right way, she'd finally get it. But Atticus helped me see that I can't change her perspective. I can only focus on my own healing. It's disappointing, but it's realistic. Some people don't change no matter what happens. Danny keeps making progress at therapy. 9 months after he started going regularly, he's doing things I never thought possible. Graciela calls me into a session one afternoon to show me something. She takes me to the group room where Danny is sitting with 3 other kids around his age. One of them is new to the program. The kid looks scared and keeps his arms crossed tight. Danny is talking to him in this calm, patient voice. He's explaining how the feelings chart works and showing the kid the different coping strategies they learn. The new kid asks if therapy actually helps. Danny tells him it changed everything for him. He says he used to hit people when he got upset, but now he knows better ways to handle big feelings. Graciela pulls me aside after and says Danny has natural empathy and leadership skills that were hidden under years of bad management. She says when kids have proper boundaries and support, their real personality can finally show through. Watching Danny help that scared kid made me realize how much he's grown. The violence wasn't who he really was. It was just what he learned when nobody taught him anything else. I start thinking about college more seriously. I'm 16 now and only have 2 more years before I graduate. I need to figure out what I want to study. One night I'm lying in bed scrolling through college websites and something clicks. I want to study something related to child welfare or special education advocacy. Living through this nightmare showed me how many kids fall through cracks when parents don't follow through with help. How many kids like Danny never get the therapy they need because their parents make excuses? How many kids like me get hurt over and over because nobody notices or nobody wants to get involved? The emergency room nurse noticed. The social worker made the report. Michelle investigated. Atticus helped us talk to each other. Graciela taught Danny new skills. All these people stepped in and changed our lives. I want to be one of those people for other families. I want to help kids who are stuck like we were. I mentioned my college plans at dinner one night. I tell my mother I'm thinking about social work or special education. Her face changes immediately. She puts down her fork and stares at me. She says I'm going to go tell everyone she was a terrible mother and ruin her reputation. She says I'm going to use what happened to make her look bad to strangers. I feel my chest get tight, but I keep my voice calm. I tell her I'm going to help other kids, not talk about her. I say there are families out there struggling right now who need support and resources. She doesn't listen. She just keeps talking about how I'm going to embarrass her and make people think she abused us. Danny looks uncomfortable and excuses himself from the table. I finish eating in silence while my mother rants about how ungrateful I am after everything she's done for us. The next week in therapy, I tell Atticus about the college conversation. I tell him I'm worried about leaving for school while Danny is still young. I'm worried about what happens if my mother stops taking him to therapy once there's less oversight from CPS. I'm worried she'll go back to making excuses and letting him slide. Atticus listens and then asks me a question. He asks if I plan to sacrifice my future to parent my brother. I don't know what to say. He tells me I've already done more than any teenager should have to do. I spoke up when I got hurt. I participated in therapy. I supported Danny's progress, but I can't put my life on hold to make sure my mother does her job. He says Danny has his own support system now. He has Graciela and his teachers and the monitoring from CPS. He says it makes sense, but it's hard to accept. I've spent so many years being scared and watching out for danger. It's hard to just let go and trust other people to handle it. We have a family session 2 weeks later. Atticus asks Danny how he feels about me going to college eventually. I expect Danny to say he'll miss me or ask me not to go. Instead, he surprises me completely. He says he wants me to go to college. He says he'll keep going to therapy because he likes who he is now. He looks right at me and says he doesn't want to go back to being the kid who hurt people. He says therapy taught him how to be someone he actually likes. Hearing him say that makes my throat tight. I never thought Danny understood how bad things were before. I never thought he'd remember or care. But he does understand. He knows he was hurting me and he knows things are better now. He wants to keep the progress he's made. That means more to me than anything my mother could say. Michelle does her quarterly check-in 3 months after the monitoring got reduced. She interviews each of us separately and checks Danny's therapy attendance records. She looks through the school reports and talks to Graciela on the phone. Then she writes up her report for the court. She tells us the family situation remains stable. Danny is continuing therapy and hasn't had any violent incidents in 10 months. The children are safe and doing well. But she notes ongoing concerns about my mother's attitude. She writes that my mother still shows resistance to accepting full responsibility for the neglect. She writes that my mother complies with requirements, but frames herself as a victim of an unfair system. The judge reads the report and decides to keep the quarterly monitoring in place. My mother is annoyed, but she doesn't argue. She knows arguing will just make things worse. Danny's special education teacher sends home his progress report in May. I read it at the kitchen table while my mother makes dinner. The report shows Danny is now performing at grade level in most subjects. His reading comprehension improved 2 full levels this year. His math scores are above average. His behavior ratings are excellent. The teacher wrote a note at the bottom saying Danny has been nominated for a student leadership role next year. She wrote that proper support made all the difference for him. She wrote that she's proud of how far he's come. I show the report to Danny and he grins. He's proud of himself. He should be proud. He worked hard to get here. My mother reads the report and her reaction makes me want to scream. She says this proves she was right all along to protect Danny from people who didn't understand him. She says if she'd listened to everyone criticizing her parenting, Danny wouldn't be doing this well. She completely misses that his success came from the very interventions she fought against. She completely misses that he's thriving because of therapy and structure and boundaries, all the things she refused to provide. I've stopped trying to correct her version of history. She's going to believe what she wants to believe. Nothing I say will change that. The acceptance letter from the state university arrives in June. I open it at the mailbox and my hands shake reading the words. I got in. They're offering me a scholarship that covers most of the tuition. The social work program accepted me. I'm actually going to college. I run inside to tell Danny. He's in his room building something with LEGOS. I show him the letter and he jumps up and hugs me. He asks if he can visit my dorm when I move in. He asks if I'll come home on weekends. He's genuinely excited for me. That's when I realize how much our relationship has healed. A year ago, I was scared of him. I couldn't be in the same room without watching for signs he might explode. Now he's my little brother again. We play games together and talk about normal things and he asks about my future. The violence is gone, the fear is gone. We actually have a relationship now. My high school graduation ceremony is in 3 weeks. I lie in bed at night and realize I'm not checking the lock on my door anymore. I'm not listening for Danny's footsteps in the hallway. I'm not tensing up when I hear him moving around downstairs. For the first time in years, I sleep through the night without waking up scared. Danny knocks on my door in the morning to ask if I want breakfast, and I say yes without that spike of fear in my chest. We eat cereal together at the kitchen table and talk about his plans for summer, and it feels normal. He tells me about a project he's building with Aries and asks if I want to see it later. I actually want to spend time with my brother now. That's the biggest change. We have a relationship that isn't built on me avoiding him or protecting myself. My therapy sessions with the counselor at the school helped me learn to speak up when something bothers me instead of just accepting everything. I told my mom last week that I needed her to stop commenting on my college plans, and she actually backed off. Not because she suddenly respects me, but because she knows I'll call Michelle if she crosses certain lines. Laura shows up to my graduation in a new dress she bought special for the occasion. She takes dozens of pictures of me in my cap and gown. She hugs me and tells me how proud she is. Then she posts the photos on social media with a long caption about being a proud mom, watching her son graduate, despite all the challenges their family has faced. She tags it with inspirational quotes about motherhood and perseverance. I see the post on my phone during the reception after the ceremony and feel that familiar irritation rising up. She's performing again, making herself the hero of a story where she was actually the problem. But I've learned in therapy that I can't control how she sees things. I can't make her acknowledge what really happened or take real responsibility. Some people never change their version of events no matter how much evidence piles up against them. That's not my responsibility to fix anymore. I scroll past her post and focus on the messages from friends and teachers congratulating me. The summer stretches out before me with this weird mix of freedom and purpose. I get a job at the grocery store stocking shelves 3 days a week. The money goes into my college fund. On my days off, Danny and I do things we never could before. We go to the movies and he doesn't have a meltdown when the theater is crowded. We play basketball at the park and he handles losing a game without throwing the ball at my face. He teaches me about his special interests, the different types of trains and how suspension bridges work, and I actually listen because I'm not scared of him anymore. He shows me the project he's building with Aries, this huge Lego city with a working monorail system, and his face lights up explaining how all the pieces connect. We get ice cream after and sit on the bench outside talking about nothing important. These are the normal brother things I thought we'd never have. The violence and fear that defined our relationship for so many years is just gone. Danny learned he could be different, and he chose to stay different. Graciela calls my mom in for a progress meeting in July. I go along because I'm curious about the official assessment. Graciela pulls up Danny's charts and shows us the behavior tracking from the past 10 months. 0 incidents of violence, 0 aggressive outbursts at the school or home. His communication scores improved dramatically. His social skills ratings went from below average to above average. She tells my mom this is some of the best progress she's seen in her entire career working with kids. She explains that Danny's case proves what proper intervention can achieve when families commit to the process. Laura nods along, but her face has that blank look she gets when people compliment the very things she fought against. Graciela says Danny's success came from consistent therapy, clear boundaries at home, and his own hard work learning new skills. My mom thanks her politely but doesn't really engage with what Graciela is saying. On the drive home, Laura mentions that Danny was always going to improve eventually, because that's just how development works. She completely misses that his improvement came from the interventions she resisted for years. Michelle schedules her final check-in before I leave for college. She comes to the house in early August and interviews each of us separately like always. She asks Danny about school and therapy and his friends. She asks my mom about maintaining the behavioral strategies at home. Then she pulls me aside and asks how I'm really doing. I tell her honestly that things are good. Danny is stable. He goes to therapy every week without complaint. His grades are solid. He has friends now. I feel safe at home. Michelle writes everything down in her report. Then she looks up at me and says something that catches me off guard. She tells me I should be proud of myself for speaking up that day at the hospital. She says my honesty saved both me and Danny. A lot of kids in my situation stay quiet because they're scared, or they've been taught that family problems stay private. But I told the truth when it mattered, and that changed everything. She says Danny got the help he desperately needed, and I got to stop living in fear. That's because I was brave enough to answer the nurse's questions honestly. Her words sit heavy in my chest because I never thought of it that way. I just told the truth about my broken nose. But she's right that truth started everything that came after. I ask Michelle what happens if my mom stops taking Danny to therapy once I'm gone, and the oversight ends. She knows I'm worried about leaving Danny alone with Laura. Michelle explains that the school is now trained to watch for warning signs. Danny's teachers know his history and his needs. They'll notice if he starts regressing. CPS will always be a resource if problems come up again. But she says the best protection is Danny's own investment in his progress. He likes who he is now. He told Graciela in therapy that he doesn't want to go back to being the kid who hurt people. He's proud of his friends and his achievements at the school. That internal motivation is stronger than any external monitoring. Michelle says I did my part by speaking up. Now Danny has the tools and support he needs. I have to trust that he'll use them. It's hard to accept, but I know she's right. I can't sacrifice my future to parent my brother. Laura finishes her final required family therapy session in mid-August. Atticus schedules it as a wrap-up meeting to review progress and close our case. We all sit in his office for the last time. Atticus goes through his notes from the past year. He talks about how far Danny has come with proper support. He mentions my growth in learning to advocate for myself. Then he addresses my mom directly. He tells her he hopes she's internalized the lessons about structure and boundaries. He says Danny's success proves that consistent expectations and proper intervention work. He asks if she plans to maintain the strategies even without court oversight. Laura assures him she understands everything now. She says she'll keep taking Danny to therapy and following through with the behavioral plans. Her voice sounds sincere, but I see that familiar look in her eyes. That dismissiveness that never really went away. She's saying what Atticus wants to hear just like she did to pass the parenting classes. She doesn't actually believe she did anything wrong. She still thinks everyone overreacted and she was just a struggling mom doing her best. Atticus seems to notice too because he pauses before closing his folder. But there's nothing more he can do. The court requirements are met. Our case is officially closed. My college dorm room is on the 3rd floor of a building that smells like cleaning products and new carpet. I move in on a Saturday in late August. Danny helps me carry boxes up the stairs. He's careful with my stuff and asks where I want everything placed. My roommate hasn't arrived yet, so we have time to organize without rushing. Danny unpacks my books and arranges them on the shelf by size. He helps me make the bed and hangs my calendar on the wall. When everything is done, we sit on the edge of the bed and he gets quiet. I ask if he's okay and he nods. He says he's proud of himself for managing his emotions today. Saying goodbye is hard, but he's not having a meltdown or hitting anything. He's using his coping strategies like Graciela taught him. He takes deep breaths when he feels overwhelmed. He talks about his feelings instead of acting them out. I tell him I'm proud of him too. He's come so far from the kid who broke my nose over a calculator. We hug before he leaves and it feels real. Not scared or forced, just two brothers who actually care about each other. Laura drives me to campus that morning and stays for the move-in process. On the drive back home, she starts talking about how glad she is this whole ordeal is finally over. She says everyone can stop treating her like a criminal now. She mentions how exhausting it's been having people monitor her parenting and question her decisions. She talks about finally getting her life back to normal without social workers and therapists breathing down her neck. I sit in the passenger seat listening to her rewrite history in real time. She sees herself as the victim in this story. The struggling mother who was unfairly targeted by an overzealous system. She'll probably always see it that way no matter how much evidence exists that she neglected both her kids. But that's her problem now, not mine. I'm moving forward with my life. I got the help I needed. Danny got the help he needed. What my mom chooses to believe about her role in all of it doesn't change those facts. My first semester of college hits different from I expected. The social work classes feel personal in a way other subjects never did. I'm learning about child welfare systems and mandatory reporting and family intervention models. I'm studying the exact processes that saved me and Danny. I volunteer with a campus organization that supports kids in foster care. We run tutoring programs and social events and mentorship opportunities. Helping these kids who've been through the system gives me purpose. It helps me process my own experience by turning it into something useful. One of the kids I tutor is 12 and reminds me of Danny before therapy. He's angry and reactive and doesn't trust adults. I work with him on homework but also on communication skills, teaching him what I learned from watching Danny's transformation. The work is hard, but it feels right. Like I'm taking everything that happened to me and using it to help others who are stuck in similar situations. My past doesn't have to just be trauma. It can be the foundation for helping other kids get the intervention they need before things get as bad as they did in my family. Every Tuesday night, my laptop sits open on my dorm desk with Danny's face filling the screen. He tells me about his math test where he got a B+ and how Aries came over to build Legos last weekend. He talks about his therapy session with Graciela, where they worked on managing frustration when group projects don't go his way. His voice is calm and happy, nothing like the angry kid who used to punch walls and break things. He asks about my classes and actually listens to my answers instead of interrupting or melting down. These video calls prove that his progress is real, not just good behavior while people were watching. He's genuinely different now because he learned the skills he needed instead of just getting excuses. When we hang up each week, I feel this relief knowing he's okay and staying that way. Thanksgiving break arrives in November, and I drive home wondering what I'll find. The house looks the same from outside, but everything feels different when I walk through the door. Danny hugs me without any awkwardness and shows me the new Lego set he's building. We spend the afternoon working on it together while he tells me about his friends at the school. Laura makes dinner and keeps making these comments about how well Danny is doing and how maybe all this therapy is overkill now. She says he's been good for months, so probably he doesn't need to go every week anymore. She mentions how expensive it is even though his insurance covers it completely. Danny looks uncomfortable when she talks like this but doesn't say anything. After dinner, I go to my room and call Michelle even though it's late. I tell her about Laura's comments and ask if she can stop Danny's therapy now that the court monitoring ended. Michelle listens quietly while I explain my concerns about Laura sliding back into old patterns once nobody is checking on her anymore. Michelle's voice stays calm when she reminds me that Danny is 13 now and actually wants to keep going to therapy. He tells Graciela things he doesn't tell anyone else and uses the coping strategies because they make his life better. The school watches him carefully and knows what warning signs to look for if things start going wrong again. She says I did what I needed to do by speaking up when I was 15 and getting help for both of us. Now Danny has tools now and people watching out for him. I can't control what Laura does, but I also can't spend my life being his parent when I'm supposed to be his brother. Her words make sense even though letting go feels scary after years of being the only one protecting him. Sunday afternoon comes too fast and I pack my stuff to head back to campus. Danny helps me carry bags to my car and hugs me goodbye without any meltdown or hitting. Laura waves from the porch looking relieved that the holiday is over. I drive back thinking about how our family will never be normal or perfect. Laura will probably always believe she did nothing wrong and everyone overreacted to one incident. She'll never fully understand that she failed us for years by choosing laziness over actually parenting. But Danny and I both got help, even though it took me getting seriously hurt to make anyone pay attention. The system finally worked for us after failing us for so long. Danny's whole transformation proves he was never the problem, just a kid who needed proper support and boundaries instead of excuses. I'm studying social work now and volunteering with kids in foster care, turning my terrible experience into something useful. Helping other kids get intervention before things get as bad as they did in my family gives me purpose. Every tutoring session and every time I advocate for a kid who needs help feels like taking all that pain and making it count for something. That feels like the best possible outcome from a really terrible situation, using what I survived to help others survive too.